Do you want to feel like an irresistible magnet to your husband while you're also creating a deeper connection and more abundance and financial intimacy? Today, I'm sharing 4 mistakes that might be blocking you, just like they were blocking me, and the surprising solution that not only created more abundance for us, but also led to me becoming a New York Times bestselling author. That's in mistake number 4, which is the most embarrassing mistake. Although mistake number 3, also very embarrassing. If you're anything like I was, the solution is going to sound crazy to you. It sure did to me. But if you've got the courage, the rewards of financial intimacy are extraordinary. Let's dive in. I'm Laura Doyle, New York Times bestselling author, and I was the perfect wife until I got married. I'm passionate about showing women how to make their marriages playful and passionate without his conscious effort, even if it seems hopeless. This is the Empowered Wife podcast, where happy wives share exactly what we did and said to make our struggling marriages last and thrive. I want to learn a little something about you. Who handles the finances at your house? Is it you, or is it your husband, or do you do it together, or do you have separate finances? Comment below this video. And if you're just listening to the audio of this podcast, come on over to YouTube, do a search for Laura Doyle, and subscribe to the Empowered Wife podcast so you can join in the conversation. If you and your husband are not on the same page about finances, it can be lonely, it can be stressful, and pretty overwhelming, especially if you're the one that's more financially savvy. I still remember how burdened I felt managing the finances in my early marriage, where I was agonizing about how we were going to pay all the bills that were coming due while he was just watching cartoons. So it felt terrible, but I no longer stress about the finances or feel burdened by them because my husband handles all that now, and he does a great job. In fact, I've never felt more connected to him and more magnetic to him, and I've never felt more abundant either. So I just wish I had known about these 4 mistakes that I was making back in the bad old days, because they all go together. They were costing me intimacy and prosperity and my irresistibility to my husband. So let's jump into these 4 mistakes so that you don't make them like I did. Let's start with the first mistake I made, which was that I stopped being receptive. Now, when John and I were first dating, he was always treating me to dinner, bringing me flowers, and taking me on trips. And I thought he was so sweet and so romantic. And I felt adored and special and so taken care of. And he just loved that. He loved that whenever he would ask me out or bring me a present, I was easy to delight. I was pleasable, and I received all of his offers. And it was a win-win situation. Like, he felt so good being my hero, and I felt so good being treated like a queen. But as soon as we got married and he started saying, like, let me take you out to dinner or let's go on a trip, I was like, oh no, we have to save money. We can't afford that. So I was no longer receiving his offers. And what I didn't know at the time was that receptivity is the essence of femininity. It's so big. I'm going to say it again, actually, because I just didn't know. Receptivity is the essence of femininity. So what that means is that when I was so receptive, well, my husband found that very feminine, and that's fundamentally what he's attracted to. So the more feminine I was, the more attractive, the more magnetic I was. And when I was starting to reject him or turn down his offers, that was really hurting my magnetism with him. I was a lot less attractive. In fact, by not receiving, I actually started to seem masculine, and rejection is just not as appealing or as attractive as receptivity. So I was making a huge mistake. It really cost us intimacy, and it cost us prosperity as well, as you'll see as I get onto this next mistake. The second big mistake I made was just as damaging. I tried to control my husband around money. Now, when we got married, I decided that I should be responsible for handling our finances, our joint finances, because I wanted them to be done the right way, which would be my way. So that seemed like the best decision to me. I didn't realize at the time, of course, that I was just scared. I was scared that wouldn't have enough money. And because I was so scared, I became controlling. Control is always about fear. And I just kind of muscled my way in there and took over the finances. Now, the irony here is that before we were married, John was self sufficient and he was debt free, whereas I was way over my head drowning in credit card debt that he then paid off for me. But still, I thought that I would be the best person to handle the finances, obviously, because I wanted them done my way. And that meant that I had to micromanage him. I had to tell him he could only take so much money out of the ATM this week, so we would go negative. And by the way, don't order any Cokes at the restaurant. It's a ripoff. We can't afford it. You don't need a Coke anyway. So as you can imagine, I started to seem like more like my husband's smother mother than the wife and lover that I really wanted to be. And men are just not physically attracted to their mothers. So my magnetism was like diminishing, getting smaller and smaller every single day. And that really hurt because I felt really rejected and alone. And my marriage just kind of felt like a big mistake because we were also doing so badly financially. I mean, we were always broke. We were always racking up new debt. And it was very stressful and painful. But there was one more mistake that I was making that was about to cost us big time. And that was around the time that I started asking women who had happy marriages for their secrets because I was thinking I had just made such a big mistake with my marriage that I really just needed to get divorced or else it was going to be like this forever. And let's not forget, ever. But there was another big mistake that I was making that was also costing me magnetism and abundance and all kinds of intimacy too. The third mistake I was making is that I just did not trust my husband, especially when it came to finances. Now, one of those happy wives that I interviewed back at that time, trying to figure out how I could possibly stay married or trying to like extract her secrets from her, said that for them, she had let her husband handle all the finances for both of them and that had been a huge relief and she really enjoyed it and appreciated him doing that. And I just remember thinking like, yeah, well, have you got anything else? Because that is not going to work for us. Because I just didn't think John was up to the task. I just didn't trust him to take over our finances. But on the other hand, I was so tired. I was so exhausted. I was so lonely and so desperate for a change in my marriage. I decided I would experiment with relinquishing control of the finances to him, even though I didn't trust him to do it. I thought he was probably going to screw up. I went to him one day and said, you know what? I can't handle the finances. It's too stressful for me, which felt incredibly vulnerable because I still thought I was smarter than he was. And I really just dreaded the mess that I thought he was going to make, like dig us an even deeper hole. But I guess I was just really feeling brave that day. So I was vulnerable and I said that. And he took over the finances and I've got to admit, didn't really go that well at first. And the reason for that is because I still wasn't trusting him. I was being a little more subtle about it, but I was still trying to control how he was doing things. I was still micromanaging. Like I would say like, oh, don't forget about the car registration. That's coming up. You still have to pay that. Or, hey, I think you should be putting money aside for the taxes. Those are going to be due pretty soon. So it was obvious to him that I was still micromanaging him. And so things didn't go that well. Thankfully, eventually I got braver and I really did stop micromanaging my husband around the finances. And to my surprise, he did a good job. In fact, things were going better financially for us than they had been when I'd been managing things. It blew my mind. And something else happened that I remember really felt so good at the time, which is we would go out to dinner and at the end, John would pick up the check and he'd figure out the tax. And it felt like he was treating me again, just like in those glory days when we first were dating. You know, he was taking me out. And of course, he was still paying for that bill out of our joint account. But I just loved the feeling of being taken care of. It felt more romantic. So it was great. Our marriage was flourishing. My magnetism was back up higher than it had been in a long time. And our finances were actually doing better too. The fourth big mistake I made was thinking I was always right. Things had gotten so much better in my marriage so fast that I had this intense desire to write down what I had learned and share it with other women so that they wouldn't have to suffer like I had been in their marriages just because they just didn't know. So I wrote a book and I told John I thought at least 2,000 women would be interested in reading this book. So John said, well, let's self-publish it. And he did. He has been published my first book. And it was exciting because the LA Times did a story about it right away. And then we sold out that first run of 2,500 copies of that book that we had printed pretty quickly. And so I said, hey, John, we need to print more books. We sold out. Let's print some more books. But John just wasn't thinking that was such a good idea. John just didn't want to do that. And I was really very upset about that because I felt like he was going to cost me the chance to get this message across to sell this book. And so I said, come on, please, let's just print some more books. Please, can we just print some more books? I wanted to just steamroll him and print some more books. But because the book was about how to have a playful, passionate marriage by being more respectful and relinquishing control and being more receptive of your husband, I thought I should at least try to find out why he didn't think it was such a good idea to print more books, even though I really thought that I was right. And it turns out he thought we were over our heads. He thought this book was special and that it deserved more than we could give it as publishers. He thought we needed to find a big publisher, a more experienced publisher that could give this book all that it deserved. But I thought that sounded scary because I had no idea how to get a big publisher. And I just wanted to keep doing what we had been doing and stay in my comfort zone because I was scared. But John wasn't scared. So together, we found a literary agent, and that agent shopped the book to 10 big publishers, and 9 of them rejected it. But Doris Cooper, the amazing and visionary editor of Simon & Schuster at that time, saw potential in that book, and she spent over a year with me rewriting it painstakingly, making it organized, concise, and clear so that the message came right through. And then Simon & Schuster taught me how to speak about my book so people could understand the value of it quickly. And then they used their marketing might to get me on the Today Show and The View and Dateline. So it was an incredibly joyful moment when we got a call from Doris that my first book, The Surrendered Wife, debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. We were holding hands. We were in the back of a car being driven around Manhattan to our next TV appearance when it came. And John felt like my hero, and I was so thrilled. All my book dreams came true. And I knew I was very magnetic in that moment. It was translated into 19 languages in 30 countries, and it started a worldwide movement of women who practice the 6 intimacy skills together. So I learned a little bit about humility that day and how to love and be loved in return. And I can't think of anything more valuable that I've ever learned, which is why I'm still so passionate about sharing resources like the Surrendered Wife book and my newest book, The Empowered Wife, which lays out the 6 intimacy skills step by step. And this podcast where we talk about the 6 intimacy skills every single week. So if you want to create irresistible magnetism for your husband and a deeper connection and more abundance and financial intimacy, I invite you to just ask yourself, how can I be more receptive to him today? Or how can I relinquish control of what he does with money a little bit more? Or could I trust him to handle the finances for both of us? Or could I listen to his ideas and consider them even though I think I'm right? Which one of these could you experiment with today? Or if they all sound crazy, tell me about that in the comments below. If you love these tips on how I transform my struggling marriage into a playful, passionate one, then subscribe to the Empowered Wife podcast. Get the ideas and the inspiration you need to make your marriage shiny and amazing so you feel desired and taken care of and special. On next week's podcast, my guest Marley shares about how she thought her marriage was beyond repair after she went home with another man and they separated. So tune in to hear what she did that brought him home again and made her marriage strong. In the meantime, I hope you are having lots of fun. Today's fun fact is that I have so many tabs open that I can't even find the one that's playing Baby Shark on repeat. So please send help, do, 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 do. Please send help, do, 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 do. For more on how to make your marriage playful and passionate without his conscious effort, even if it seems hopeless right now, check this out.